Let's talk about Ray Dalio. You've probably heard of him, founder of Bridgewater Associates, the biggest hedge fund on the planet. I mean, by any measure, the guy is one of the most successful people alive. But the real question is, how did he do it? Well, the answer is not what you think. It's actually a story about a massive, colossal failure, about painful reflection, and about a system he built to turn his biggest weakness into his absolute greatest strength. Okay, let's get into it.
So you open his book, and this is one of the first things you read. Not a boast, not a flex, but a confession. He basically says that any success he's ever had came from one thing: knowing how to deal with not knowing. This one single idea, this radical humility, it's the key that unlocks everything else. It's the foundation for his entire way of thinking.
So when he talks about principles, what does he even mean? Well, think of them like your own personal recipe book for success. They're these timeless rules that you figure out through experience, and they help you make way better decisions way faster, right? So instead of freaking out every time a new situation comes up, you apply a principle you already know works.
But here's the thing. Dalio was not always this humble guy. Oh no, far from it. His journey actually starts with that kind of brash, almost arrogant confidence that you see in a lot of people who get successful early. He was a maverick, and you know what? For a while, it worked like a charm. Yeah, so he gets fired from his job, he says, for being too wild. And yeah, he literally punched his boss, and he starts Bridgewater right out of his apartment. A few years later, he's advising these huge companies. We're talking McDonald's, the World Bank. He's making a name for himself as this guy who can basically predict the future of the economy. He was absolutely on top of the world. And this is where the story completely flips. Because all that confidence, that absolute certainty that he was right, it led him straight into what he calls his my abyss. A failure so total, so crushing, it almost wiped him out completely.
You have to picture it. The early 1980s were just economic chaos. Inflation was out of control, interest rates were skyrocketing, the markets were a mess. And Dalio, after studying everything, develops this very strong and very public opinion about what was about to happen.
He goes on Wall Street Week, which was the financial TV show back then, and he publicly predicts a full-blown economic depression. And listen to the words he used. He didn't say it was likely or probable. He said absolute certainty. I mean, the conviction there is just staggering. He was all in. And then the market didn't crash. In fact, it did the exact opposite. The U.S. economy was about to enter one of the greatest bull markets in its entire history. His prediction wasn't just a little off, it was spectacularly 100% wrong. And the consequences were just catastrophic. He lost everything. He had to let go of his whole team, people he considered family. Bridgewater went from being this rising star back to just him, a one-man shop. This abyss was real, and it was humiliating. He was so broke he had to borrow $4,000 from his dad just to pay the family's bills. But, and this is the most important part of the whole story, for Dalio, this crushing failure wasn't the end. It was the beginning. He calls it the single most important thing that ever happened to him because it forced him to tear down his entire way of thinking and rebuild it from scratch. This is it. This is the pivot. His whole philosophy, everything in his book, it all hinges on this one simple mental shift. He went from thinking, I'm right, to asking, how do I know I'm right? He realized the biggest threat wasn't a bad market, it was his own arrogance. He developed this intense fear of being wrong, which, paradoxically, made him so much better at being right. So how'd he do it? He started turning these painful lessons into principles. He literally decided he was going to build a system, a kind of decision-making machine that was way smarter and more reliable than his own brain could ever be. And this, right here, this is his blueprint. It's brilliant. He calls it the success loop. You start with these big, audacious goals. Then you're going to fail. It's inevitable. But instead of quitting, you diagnose that failure. You find the real root cause. From that diagnosis, you design a principle so you never make that same mistake again. And that new principle makes you better, so you can go after even bigger goals. It's like this perpetual motion machine for getting better. So the key insight is that failure isn't the problem, it's actually a required part of the process. But you have to fail well. And what that means is having these painful failures that teach you huge lessons, but that don't knock you out of the game completely. It's about surviving your mistakes so you can actually learn from them. This new mindset turned into a really practical 4-part strategy. First, he started actively hunting for smart people who disagree with him. Second, he learned some humility, that sometimes the smartest move is just to admit you don't have a clue. Third, he wrote down all his principles, turning them into repeatable algorithms. And finally, he learned how to structure his risks so that he could never again have a single failure wipe him out.
To really systemize his principles, he realized he could combine the best of both worlds, human intelligence and machine intelligence. See, our brains are amazing at logic and creativity, but computers, they can process 1,000,000 times more information. They have zero emotion, and they never forget anything. By turning his principles into code, he basically created a partner that could check his work and catch his biases.
So, okay, what does all this mean for the rest of us? I mean, this story isn't just for hedge fund managers. Dalio is absolutely convinced that this approach, this whole success loop, is a universal model for getting pretty much anything you want out of life.
And he uses this really powerful analogy to explain it. He says, imagine we all have a choice. We can stay right where we are, where it's safe, and just have an okay life. Or we can try to cross a dangerous jungle to get a truly terrific life on the other side. His principles, they're like the map for that jungle. They're a way to manage the risks so you can actually make it through.
And that really brings us to the final and most critical question. This isn't just about Ray Dalio's journey. It's about yours. So think about it. What is that one big, audacious goal you have? And now, what's the biggest, most painful failure in your past that holds the exact lesson you need to learn to make that goal a reality? Because according to Dalio, that failure, it isn't your obstacle, it's your path.